Hi, and welcome to this Noodle tutorial. My name is Johan, and I'll show you how to build a simple task list in this video series. When this tutorial is done, we will have built a simple interface using the built-in UI controls, and we will have learned how to set up a simple backend and how to use the most common data nodes in Noodle. In this first video, we will focus on building out the UI interface for our app, and in the second video, we will connect it to a backend and use the Noodle data nodes. Let's dive in. Here I am in a fresh Noodle workspace, and I'll start by creating a new project. I'm going to name it my task list, and I'll use the Hello World project template. I'll use the default cloud project settings so that I can share this with someone else in the future. Okay, so this template starts with just one component, the app component, and it has a group node and a text node as its defaults. Let's delete the text node so that we just have a group node left. First, I want to build a simple header for this app. I'm going to add a group to the existing group node by right-clicking in the group node, which brings up the node picker. I'll type in the first letters of group and then click here with the mouse. The new group was added as a child to the existing group because I right-clicked on that group. The group node is used a lot for layouting and structuring content into sections. I'm going to name this new group header so that I know what it is. Then let's work a bit with the group's properties. My header is going to have 3 text nodes in it, so I want the group that contains them to be the height of those 3 text nodes. I'm going to change the dimensions here to be content height. By default, the group node lays out its children nodes vertically. Let's see how that works, but first let's give the header a different background color. We don't see the background color because we told the group to be the height of its children, but it has no children, so let's fix that by adding 3 text nodes. I'll add the first 2 text nodes by using the node picker, and the last one, I'll just copy one of the text nodes I just added and then paste it back in. As you can see, the text nodes are placed on top of each other. Now let's change the group's layout to horizontal. The text nodes are now laid out after each other from left to right. The text nodes share the available width between each other, but in my case, I just want them to take up the content size, so let's change that. Let's give the text a bit more breathing room by adding a bit of padding to this group. And then let's set the layout back to vertical so that the texts are stacked on top of each other. This first text node will sort of be my logo for the experience, so I'll call it logo. And then I'm going to align it to the right, and I'm going to style the font family and the font size a bit. I'll also make the font color white, and then let's have it say my task list. That would actually look much better if it was all uppercase, so let's use the case property to change that. Moving on to the second text node, I'm going to call this number of tasks left. It's going to contain a number that I want to be bold, white, and quite big. For now, I'm just going to have it display the number 0. Even though I want the number to be big, I think it has a bit too much space around itself, so I'm going to update the line height to 1, And now it's a bit more snug. Next, I'm going to look at the third text node and update its properties. Again, we'll update the font family, the font size, and the color of the font. And let's also make this uppercase. I thought this looked okay, but my designer friend told me to mess with the letter spacing a bit, so let's do that. Yeah, they were right. This looks a lot better. The final thing I'm going to change for the header nodes is to make the header group sticky. If I have a lot of tasks displayed, I want to be able to scroll them, but I want the header to always stay in place, and setting the position of this group to sticky will achieve that. That looks good to me. I'm going to continue to build out the visuals in the app component here, so I'm thinking that I should make the header nodes here into its own component. It's always good practice to break your Noodle projects down into components, both for reusing them later and also for making the project more structured and simple to follow or understand. I'm going to create a new visual component by clicking here and then giving it the name header. Let's delete the node that was created automatically and then jump back into the app component. I'm going to select the nodes that make up my header by clicking and dragging, and then just using standard keyboard shortcuts, I'm going to cut out the nodes. Let's select the header component again, and here I'll paste in the cutout nodes, again using standard keyboard shortcuts. Now let's drag in the component from the side here and drop it on the group node. I could have also added it by using the node picker. All components that you create in your project have their own place at the bottom here in the node picker. Excellent. Now let's make something that looks like a nice task item. I'm going to start by adding a group. This is going to be the group that contains the task list items, so I'll call it content group. Let's give this group a bit of padding so that the content has some space. Then I'm going to make another group. Let's call this task item. And let's change its dimensions to be content height and full width. Now let's add a checkbox node and a button node. I don't want these nodes stacked on top of each other like this, so let me change the layout of the task item group to horizontal. Then I want the button to be right aligned, so I'll select it and change that property. Then let's also have the checkbox be centered vertically, like this. The label for the checkbox will contain the task description, so let's put in a dummy text for now. If a task is done, the checkbox will be checked, and unchecked if not done. It would be nice if the description text was a bit grayed out when a task is done. We can do that by selecting the checked state of the checkbox here. Now, any changes we make to the properties will only be shown if the checkbox is in the checked state, so let's update the label's text color. let's test it in our preview window. Onwards to the button node and its styling. I don't want to have a text label, so I'll uncheck this, but I do want this to have an icon, so I'll check this here. Let's click the icon source and start typing in delete to get the trash can icon. Then let's make the icon gray and let's remove the background color of the button. Okay, starting to look good, but see what happens here when I hover over the button. I'd like that hover color to be gray instead, so let's select the hover state for the button. Just like when we made changes in the checkbox's checked state, any change that we make to the button's properties now that we have the hover state selected will only be applied when the button is hovered. So let's make the icon black and the background gray when we hover the button. That's one task item. Let's also turn this into a component. I'll do the same thing as before. Create a new visual component, delete the node that was automatically created, and then copy the relevant nodes from the app component into this new component. Now let's add a few of these to the content group. Nice, that looks like a list. In a lot of cases, we would have added a component inputs node and a component outputs node to our new component, so that we can edit the content from here. But as we will see in the second video of this series, we will get all our list item content from a backend, and we will use some of the data nodes to achieve that. I mentioned earlier that I would like the task list to scroll if I have a lot of items, so let's tackle that now. If I make the preview window a bit smaller like this and try and scroll, we can see that no scrolling happens. It's actually our group nodes that contain the ability to enable scroll. So let's select the content group here and find the enable scroll property. Now that I try and scroll in my preview window, we can see it scrolls nicely. Okay, so the last visual component we have left to do is a component that lets us make new tasks. For this, let's do things in a slightly different order. First, let's add a new visual component. Let's call it add task. And we can see here that when we create a new visual component, we will always get a group node as default. I'm going to use the canvas view in Noodle to help me design my component. So let me get the newly created component into better view here. I'm going to need a text input node where I will type in the task description. And let's also add a button that we can click to add a new task. Again, I'm going to give my group a bit of padding. I also think it would be nice if this component had a bit of a divider at the top, and I can do that by adding a border to the top of the group. But on the way to the border properties, we have the dimensions, so let's also change the group to be the content height, like so. Now, for the top border, let's make it solid, 1 pixel, and light gray in color. It's a bit hard to see in the canvas view, but we'll see it once we add it to the rest of the UI. Let's also align this whole component to the bottom and make it sticky. For the text input node, I'm going to disable the label and make it into a text area. I might have big tasks that require long descriptions, so that's why I think a text area makes sense. Let's also make it twice as tall as before. I'm going to add a bit of top padding for the text area, and then when I change the default placeholder text, I can see the padding also took hold. The button will be quick, just a tiny bit of top margin, and then let's update the label to say Add Task. Let me just move my components around a bit here in the canvas so that I can get a better overview. Excellent. Now, let's add this component to the rest of my UI. And there we have it, a nice clean UI for our task list app. In the next episode, we'll hook this up to a Noodle backend and learn how to use the Noodle data nodes. Happy noodling!